Well, good afternoon, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope podcast, and I'm so excited. I'm speaking today with Mary Pope Osborne. Um, and honestly, for all my listeners, you should know who this is. But if you were reading the Magic Tree House series growing up, she's the author of the Magic Tree House series. And I know for me, it was a magical book to read, as well as I loved the cover. That was one of my favorite parts of the book, was just staring at the cover. It was so beautiful. Um, but Mary has been so kind to take time and come on the show and answer some questions and just tell more about her life story. I would also say, if you do want to get a book that she's written about her life, she has a book called It's Memories and Life Lessons from the Magic Tree House. Came out a couple years ago, and it has snippets of the book as well as snippets from her life, and she kind of combines both of them. And that might be something that you might find interesting as well. Um, but Mary, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for asking me. It'll be fun.
So Mary, I'm going to start out because first of all, you have lived an incredible life. When I was seeing all the places you've been and the fact that you traveled the Middle East, that you survived sepsis, that you camped on in a cave in Crete. I mean, I was just like, these are like all the things that you imagine maybe doing or maybe dreaming about these things once in a while, but like you've just traveled the world. You met your husband as he was acting on the stage, which is kind of like a Hallmark movie. Um, so I want to ask you first of all, you know, what was it like camping in a cave in Crete?
It was a really nice cave. It was in the little town of Matala in on the island of Crete. And I was there with my college roommate after college, and we hitchhiked from Italy down to Crete, caught a boat from Athens, and then neither of us had much money, and we heard there were caves in this little town, and so we got to the town and we went up to the hills and we found this two-room cave. And we had a little camper stove and we just cooked our food there. We were there only 2 months, but it was a great experience. And it started my interest in Greek mythology. And I was reading a bit of Greek myths when I was sitting on the cliff edge looking out at the sea from the cave. And then finally, I just sort of segued from the cave into a van of a person who was heading around the world. And that's the whole story in itself. I don't go into it, but I ended up going through being in this van that didn't start unless you pushed it. So I like to say I had men helping me push through Greece, Turkey, um, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and finally I was in Nepal where I got blood poisoning. This is about 10 months later from
How did
my
you get it? Was it from something you ate, or how do
I
you?
never knew. It was
Oh,
one day I was pushing a bicycle down the main street of Kathmandu and my foot hurt and then my foot just swelled up and sort of turned blue. And I went to a hospital and they said it was blood poisoning and they took me in and I was there for 2 weeks and they cut into it without anesthesia and that's where
oh
I
my
read
gosh.
I had one book that someone gave me, another traveler gave me a book of The Lord of the Rings. So I'm sitting there looking at the mountain of Annapurna and in the Himalayas, having had this crazy journey. And and this, mind you, was in 1972. So we're talking about the last year of the king of Afghanistan, way before everything erupted in that part of the world for the worse for a long time. But there was so much freedom. I mean, we did encounter danger many places and um, were almost arrested a few times and we're in an earthquake and all these adventures and in a riot. But I don't know, my naivete kept me going and the spirit of adventure. And then finally, the U.S. Embassy found out I was in this hospital and contacted my parents and congressperson in North Carolina, and then they contacted the hospital, and I was able to get home and recover over a period of time. But the lust for travel and other cultures was deeply set in me at that time, and I couldn't figure out how I could find a life that could entertain those possibilities. And then um, I ended up going to this travel training school in Washington, D.C., and I got a job with the Russian Travel Bureau. And that's when my husband's play came to town from New York City, and he was playing Jesse James and performing on stage. And I fell in love with him from the balcony. It's that corny. And then afterwards found out that he was somebody I had sort of passed by in college without really knowing very well.
Hmm.
And because he had changed his looks and so forth, I had to. And this was 6 years after graduating. And then we fell for each other, and I went to New York and we got married, and he was an actor and a musician. And I had to find out what I did. I wasn't going to be this travel agent forever. That was enough for me. When half a year is that. But I started going on the road with him when he was doing shows, and I started writing. And in fact, for our wedding present, I asked the parents for a portable typewriter. And I carried that from one city to the next. And I wrote some not very good stories. And eventually, back in New York, I became a waitress and a bartender. And during the day, I would write and go up to the roof of our old tenement building. We were 6 flights up, and so another half a staircase, you could be on the roof. And I'd take a director's chair and set it up and read and write
Wow.
and try to find out what I did, what I loved. And one thing led to another, and I wrote my first book, and it was a very sad book. It was a young adult novel called Run, Run as Fast as You Can. And it was about a girl who loses a brother, which thank God I did not. I love my brothers. They're alive and well. And one of them wonders why I killed him off in this book, because it was clearly that brother. But I've loved him more ever since I wrote that book. And and then, it was the days in publishing when they took a risk on you. And like they thought they saw talent, and an agent, a friend got me to an agent, and the agent got it to an editor, and the editor got interested and took me to lunch and said, "Can you rewrite?" And
Hmm.
so I said, "Sure, I can do that." And I went back and I literally rewrote the whole book, making it deeper, better, trying to learn how to write as I was rewriting it, getting
Yeah.
books on writing, reading Hemingway to make it simple and clean and for young adults. And then uh, the book was sold, pretty quickly. And then it got good reviews, but it didn't really sell. And nowadays, they'd be likely to ask you for your royalty statement if you'd sold a book and wanted to sell another one. They want to know, well, did her last book sell any? No one asked those questions in the 80s. So
Hmm.
I I wrote three more young adult novels, and then I turned. I was volunteering with runaway kids in Times Square, um, trying to get them to write, and uh, they were in this shelter, and their writing, was so hard about their lives and so depressing. And so one
Hmm.
day I was walking down the street and I saw all these National Geographics, and a peddler was selling them, and I bought them all and took them home and cut out pictures and went back to the workshop the next day and handed out all these exotic pictures of Nepal and Africa and the Middle East and South America, of jungles and mountains. And I said, don't write about your life today. Write, put yourself there and make up a story. And it was the best day we had. It was cheerful, and kids read their papers, and they were laughing, and they were exhilarated by these fantasies of being somewhere else. So I had been trying to write about a runaway girl, and my story was so deep and sad that I put it aside, and I myself was cured like those kids for a day. I turned to mythology, and then I spent several years writing retellings of Greek myths and Norse myths and medieval tales and mermaid tales from around the world.
Hmm.
And Perseus and Medusa was a whole book, and Jason and the Argonauts. And and then I just started doing everything. I was writing picture books, and I wrote mysteries about bugs in a cottage garden patterned after Sherlock Holmes. And then Random House calls me and said, "How would you like to do a series?" And I said, "Well, I really like variety. I like different things to write about. I don't want to be trapped in a repetitive series." But then I thought, what if I fulfilled that early dream of, in my imagination, visiting all these places in time and around the world? So it brought together so many parts of me, the mythic element and the historical and the travel and even the brother relationship, because I grew up in the military with these two young brothers who were so fabulous, and we were all best friends. So that it took a year to figure out Magic Treehouse. I tried first Magic Whistles, Magic Artist Studio, Magic Cellar, um, Magic Museum, and then I was going to give up on that whole concept and turn to something else. And then I was walking through the woods with my husband and in Pennsylvania actually, and we saw an old tree house and started talking about it and the possibilities of a tree house. And then the next thing you knew, I had Magic Tree House, and then it all just fell into place, almost overnight after a year. And I tell kids the simplest ideas can sometimes be the hardest ones to find, because I
Yeah.
lived with books, made wishes. And now I'm working on the 66 Magic Treehouse book 33 years later. So I have never stopped, and I've loved it. I've never not loved doing it, or I would have stopped and done something else. But it's just gathered speed over the years, and we have my husband and our best friends who are New York professionals, a composer and a writer. We work as a team doing Magic Treehouse musicals. We have eight, in different parts of the country, and we have a Magic Treehouse um, planetarium show and Magic Treehouse graphic novels and nonfiction Magic Treehouse that my husband started when he started doing other things with the musicals. My sister took it over, so it's still just us, and we've never really done well. We've never done film or television or media because for many years I was afraid of kids wouldn't read and that they would turn to
Hmm.
you know, and also every time we started walking down any of those roads, we realized we'd lose all control over what
Yeah.
our our the very meaning of our lives was about. So, but now we're working with some really interesting people who are totally in partnership with us creatively. So in Hollywood. So I feel like there's a potential that hasn't been there before for being involved on the ground level up, and doing it ourselves. So anyway, I'm still writing the books. Other people around me are working on these other projects, but it doesn't seem to have an end in sight right now. That's a long answer to your simple question.
No, but I was thinking because children always have an imagination. So I think that's in part why your books were so fascinating is because most kids don't get to go around the world, right? And so if they're reading all of those different stories and getting to
Yeah.
glimpse different worlds, I did want to ask you though, it's so interesting. I didn't know this that it kind of almost seeds of it were birthed at a place where children with a lot of trauma and difficulty could think of something good and joyful. for their lives. I mean, is that, have you received like testimonies from kids or letters from kids saying that that's been something that's actually been helpful for them? Because I
Yeah.
mean, I was gonna say, fortunately nowadays, I mean, too many children grow up very fast, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's a major theme in this my life is hearing from people who more from young adults or teenagers or 20 people in their 20s who write me of what the books meant to them. And it's so powerful. And they come up to me sometimes in the street if they know me or after an event and get very emotional. And what my real thought is, I've had to think about it a lot because I didn't want to inflate myself. It's not me and it's not the book. It's who they were when they read those books. And usually they're between 6 and 10. And there's no matter what their life conditions, there's still sparks in them of looking at the world with wonder and feeling brave and feeling they wish they could be Jack and Annie. They have the whole ability to imagine themselves into the story. So in that time in their lives, they get a release, from whatever's going on around them. And I think when they get emotional, they're remembering themselves and missing that self that was finding strength through,
Yeah.
you know, and so I think it's really important that young kids we fan their imaginations and we give them possibilities that will help them escape their surroundings if they need to, or at least share their new knowledge with their families. We have a big program I should mention, especially if educators are listening, called I started it and it's called the Magic Trails Classroom Adventure. And it has everything you'd want, curriculum, guides, and stuff teachers can use in the classroom, life lessons. But the most significant part of the program is if educators from Title I schools write a little grant proposal that we have online. We will send them books.
Hmm.
And it's often from those experiences that I get the most powerful answers because the kids who get those books don't have books, basically, and
Hmm.
don't have access to books. And there's so many um, stories like that, like so many areas. There's no books in the household, parents don't read. And so part of a big message of Magic Treehouse on the adult side is to read with kids, to read the books as a family. And when I give away books to kids, I say, take it home and share it with your siblings and share it with your parents. And let's have a family thing go on here with the book and an adventure. And that happens. I've gotten letters where whole families have gotten involved reading. And then maybe if it's in the States, they'll go to some historical site and carry the book with them and see something that they've read about. So that to me is the most rewarding part of this is reaching out to sort of underserved populations that don't have books. And we've been doing that now for, let's see, started in 2012 for 12 years. I've had this program.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I mean, in your opinion, do you feel like kids are not getting the same sort of imaginative opportunities that you had when you were younger? Because we have a lot of technology now. And I mean, I was just in a restaurant the other day and you see like a 2, 3-year-old kid with a tablet, playing some game somewhere. And the parents, are busy, so they're not really paying attention and they just need the child to be quiet for a while so that they can talk. Um,
Yeah, I,
but
I feel strongly that's been a disaster for kids. And also the lack of freedom and the lack of ability to play, outside. Even when we lived it's in that memoir book that I wrote, when we were 6, 7, and 8. I mean, and on, of course. But in those years, we were let out every day, like, just go, go. I'll see you at lunch. And my brothers and I rode little bicycles, and we camped with boxes, and we climbed trees, and we made forts, and we had armies, and we were raised in the army, so we were into armies. But we were played spies. We pretended ghosts lived in this little house, and it was empty. And we carried on night and day in with each other in our imaginations. And that is absolutely the bedrock of my life. And what I do now, and maybe the reason I've never stopped doing it, is I play. When I go to write a story, I'm playing. I'm just not running outside climbing a tree, but I am on paper. And I get that same sense of freedom and discovery. So yeah, I think the screens are not good, and they're making us passive too. A lot of kids aren't ordering their lives through any kind of discipline, self-discipline, boundaries, learning what their strengths are, what their limits are,
Yeah.
and how to associate with others and how to negotiate with friends and siblings. Uh, Little children are amazingly qualified to uh, to live fully.
Mm.
I'm just shocked at how often they pick up on sophisticated ideas they couldn't possibly have known before in their 6 years or 7 years. I mean, I'll write a book on Shakespeare, and they get it. Leonardo da Vinci, Mozart, Louis Armstrong, they have, I don't know if they come to the world with some kind of unconscious knowledge, but they pick up knowledge so quickly, assimilate it, and follow the story. So I
Mm.
love that. I feel like we're all in the same boat, so to speak. I don't feel like I'm talking down to them at all. I feel like I get some of my best ideas from little kids when I ask them, and I ask them for title ideas and have them vote on ideas. And I attribute a lot of success to the kids giving me information and having large crowds vote on ideas that I'm thinking of, and teachers weighing in. And for 10 years, the first 10 years of this series, I was on the road all the time, visiting schools, showing slides in those days, and looking at projects the kids did in anticipation of my visit. And I told Random House, I really think this is powerful, and I think we have something here. So I started inviting some of the employees to come with me on the school visits and the book signings, and they caught on to the enthusiasm. And
Mm.
it's been an evolution, really. At one point, it was almost a mania, um, and I would show up and sign for 2,000 kids, and then just get you know completely exhausted. And now my
Wow.
crowds are smaller, but it's me. But I'm older, so it's easier to handle. But it's always been fun.
Did you, is there like a particular memory you have of a kid, of maybe a suggestion they gave you that really stands out?
Oh yeah, this is a cute one. I was in LA doing a bookstore, and I would say to these kids, I'm going to take my next adventure. I'm going to Hawaii, and I'm thinking of calling it Holiday in Hawaii. And you know, at the signing part, this little boy came up to me. He was in third grade, and he said, "Mrs. Osborne, you can do better than Holiday in Hawaii." I thought that was really cute. And I said, "Well, how can I do better?" And he said, "How about high tide in Hawaii?" And I said, "Oh, that is
Wow.
so interesting." And then from that idea, I worked in surfing, and then a tsunami. I got everything going. But just that, I thanked him. His name was Mark. And so I could say that a number of ideas came to me through a kid, especially in the beginning when there was more room to think up ideas that kids would love, like, ninjas and pirates and all those easy topics. And then it got a little more esoteric. So when I'd get to, Baghdad in the ninth century, they go and it's called Season of the Sandstorm. I would kind of then I started doing the second tier of books called the Merlin missions, and they're much longer and they have a lot more information about a culture in them. But I've been able to just stretch and go in every direction and somehow make it interesting for kids.
Wow. Did you, when you were talking earlier about how you got to just go outside and enjoy life and be imaginative, I mean, I think now for parents and also for educators, there's just so much what ifs and there's so much, violence and fears of kidnapping and all these things that keep kids kind of in an environment of fear, not necessarily like it's, put on them on purpose, but just because of how the world is now. I mean, do you have some suggestions or even ideas for educators or just for parents of ways they can help kids to enjoy and foster that imagination while still being able to be considerate of the fact that, our world is not as safe as it was in the 1970s?
Well, I think that's a good question. And I think that if there are parks nearby, if there's a fenced area, if there's a schoolyard, when you start to think you need space, that's the problem. And maybe there's a single, I don't know. I think if I had children, small children, I would be fencing in a yard and saying, these are your parameters, but go out and be yourself. Even at 4, even at 5, just go play. I would think that my yard was saying, don't, and our parents would say, don't go past this street and don't go past this street because they didn't want us in the streets. But we had a lot of room just to play around in the neighborhood with other kids.
Hmm.
And I think it's important enough that people should try to work on it, and try to get their kids into the woods or by the shore or wherever, so they also get close to nature and trust nature and get in contact with animals and learn basic. We were Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts in those days, so we would learn how to make a fire, we'd learn how to use a compass, and there was a lot more of intersection with nature and your environment.
I
So,
know, and now we don't know how to survive without a house.
oh, much less lit without our computers. Even me, I just feel I'm a big talker. But yeah, no, when people start talking about, grabbing things to keep in case we ever lose our grid, I think I'm just gonna leave the planet because I don't know how to, make heat now. I don't know how to go find water. I don't know how to do anything. I think those are good skills, even if it's just for your own confidence. I
Yeah.
wish they had those courses in school. If Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts aren't around anymore, I think those are important things. Maybe summer camp, you could learn things like that, but just to get more resourceful and resilient.
Oh no, I agree for sure. I didn't learn that at all. I wish I did because even when my husband and I've gone camping, it's like I'm useless. I don't know what to do. He has to kind of teach me anything he knows. Um, but I did want to ask you, Mary, I was just thinking you mentioned it earlier. Did you ever have any kids? Because you seem to have such a love for children.
In the 70s and 80s, my husband and I, and this sounds like we la boheme or something, but we lived in 2 rooms in New York City, and uh, we were both struggling. Those books I mentioned, all those first books I wrote, did not make much money. That's
Yeah.
why it's remarkable that people kept banking on me, so to speak. And he was on the road all the time with music or with acting. And I really thought I had to make a choice. And what happened as a blessing for me was that couple of young nephews um, came into my life who needed help. And so we bought them a house, we moved out of the city, and we got very involved in their lives and their education and helping them grow up. And I think of them now as, I mean, they're not, they have their own father. They don't, they, their mother's not in the picture, but I feel like they are mine and I am theirs. And there's been a sense of reaching out to kids who aren't my own kids and being involved so much. So it almost seems like there was a plan that it would have been really hard for me to write Treehouse if I'd been raising children on, at a poverty level.
Yeah,
So
true.
I think that I gave all of that energy to my work. And sure, over the years, you regret times you feel bad about it because you see how much joy children can bring to people. In another situation, I probably would have had kids and loved it. But the way we did it has proved out to be pretty perfect for our other responsibilities. And I think it's fine. One thing we did, which is kind of lame, but we have always had dogs that we treat like way beyond normal. They have personalities and nicknames, and we carry on about our dogs way too much. But it's a wonderful thing to have as a sort of a grounding factor in your life. I've got to get home and feed the dog. I've got to walk the dog. I have to wake up to get the dog, and then to constantly share with each other. Because his being a creative person and me, the poor dogs, they've had so many characters imposed on them that they seem to fall into acting out. So it's been a great joy in my life.
Do you like dress them up?
Well, I have, yes, but
Yes.
for a picture shoot or something. They always go along with whatever we do. They seem to have a good time. I would never try to make a dog do something it didn't want to do. But we've had so many. We've had six, and some are rescues, and we just always give them 100%. So that's a lame way to, say I've made up for kids. But I think the dogs and the nephews and my readership, it feels very satisfying.
Well, it's interesting too because Jack and Annie must feel like your children in a way.
Yeah, kind of crazy. Yeah, they do. I feel like that's maybe one reason I haven't done film or TV because I keep Jack and Annie and Will too, my husband. He's very close to those characters with the musicals and the books he's worked on. And he looks at all my books. I mean, he edits them and he gives me ideas and he knows them as well as I do. Um, we're very feel an incredible connection to those two characters. And the wonderful thing now is I've written so many books about them that I can think of a situation and I'll say to myself, "Oh, I can't wait to see what they'll do." Because I don't impose things on them. Now they react to things I get throw at them. So they're just so internalized. It's it's always a discovery.
Well, hearing you, especially how you started, I mean, a huge theme is perseverance. I think that's a big theme for any writer because it just doesn't happen right away. And I think there's that plunk in the heart for a lot of young writers when it doesn't work out now. And like you said, publishing world is very different now. It's very hard to find a publisher who likes your work. I mean, um, when you had those times when you were saying like you didn't make a lot of money, but you just really loved writing and you didn't give up, was there ever a time that you really wanted to give up, or you're just like, this isn't working, so I'm not meant to be a writer, or
No, I can't even I don't even know what I could possibly do besides writing. It wasn't like I had, great skills or my husband and my friend Jenny, who works on the graphic novels and the musicals, I feel like they could have been lawyers, they could have been doctors. They're really smart. And I'm mediocre smart, but what I am is imaginative. And so for years I didn't mention, I was into the theater myself and um majored it in college along with something else and then did it all through high school and summers and I was using my imagination constantly but I hit a wall in the theater because I thought this isn't enough. I'm not making up the characters. I'm just filling someone's image of a
Hmm.
character. And I felt my choices in that way were very limited. Um, so writing for me is just like the air I breathe now. It's not a choice. And I think, if I hadn't been published, I was blessed to be published pretty quickly. But I think if I hadn't been, I would have persisted. I would have just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And here's an important note. When I lived so many years in New York, I was around a lot of professionals and I was around a lot of writers who had writer's block. And I realized I didn't go through that system that they did. I didn't get an MFA in writing. I didn't know famous write. I just was divorced from that whole world. I was a waitress trying to write. So everything I wrote was a plus. I never judged myself harshly. And these
Hmm.
friends were crushing themselves with judgment for what they do, and then they couldn't do anything. And I just felt like if I wrote something that was not good, and there was lots of those days, it was taking me somewhere where it would be good, or I'd put it
Hmm.
away. And this is fascinating. Find out that in a later work, the elements came forward. It's almost like you have this unconscious that has so many ideas, and maybe they come out at prematurely at times. But
Wow.
you know, you don't know how it's all going to work. And I also learned an important lesson. It's very elementary, but don't get stuck. Don't get in an eddy that you can't get out of and try to fix it and try to fix it and try to fix it. I always went down a rabbit hole that way. Instead, take a break, walk away. So anytime I'm stuck, I move. I literally go make a cup of tea. I put the dog out. In the city, I take a walk and then come back and it's resolved. It's really the mind's working on it without you thinking about it.
Hmm.
And it's that old cliche of a scientist working on a problem, going in the shower and getting the answer to the problem when he's not thinking about it. And you relax your brain and something that was trying to come through will find a passage.
Hmm. That's true. You know, writing is definitely your strength, I would say, especially the way you approach it, but also, I mean, what's turned out, all the books you've written, over 60 for just Magic Trails alone. Um, what do you think is a flaw about you that you wish was different, or something that you work on and to grow in?
Well, I'm very impatient and I've thought about this and tried to fix this, I tend to interrupt people and I interrupt myself and I run from, one I don't know. I'll just get in the car and drive one place, then drive another place and just be unsettled. And but the writing's an antidote to that because suddenly I get pulled in, galvanized, and flies by, and I don't even know it's going by. So
Hmm.
impatience, scattered thinking, I fight that every day, you know.
Why do you think that is? Is that just, were you always like that as a kid?
Yeah, I was always like that. Quick remedies, I remember when I was like 5, I had a dress that got too short, so I just learned how to thread a needle. I grabbed a thread and needle and tried to sew the dress in the middle so it would be like a play suit. And it was the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen, but I had to fix the dress. I didn't know how to sew. I'm going to fix it, and I didn't obviously fix it. And I feel like I often I'm like the character Annie, I leap before I look. And that's that impatience to move on, sometime uh, miss important information because I didn't read the whole thing or I didn't let someone finish something they were trying to explain to me. So yeah, it just seems that I was born that way. I was born a twin, and my lovely twin is the nicest man on earth. And I think even in the womb, I was, you know, raring to get out. It took a long time for him to come out. We're born on different days, before midnight and after midnight. And he's so gentle and so kind and very, very patient. And somehow I think, there was something in that chemistry early on that just set. But
Wow, and I'm guessing you came out first.
oh yeah, I was dancing and singing, I just jumped out, always moving fast.
You know, in all the cultures you've been to, do you have a favorite one? Because I mean, you've seen so many and researched so many. Is there one that you find most intriguing?
Well, the one I find most, you know, I love Old England. I love the Lake District where Wordsworth was and Coleridge, and once I spent a few weeks there, and I just thought I had come back home. And I think something about the English countryside, the way it once was,
Mm.
and the nature writing and the brilliant writing of the British, especially uh, the nature writers and the pastoral writers and the old novelists. That I sink into that with a lot of peace and joy. um, but yeah, I just did a treehouse of Mongolia, of the little wild horses of Mongolia. And I thought that was a fabulous culture too, because 40% of it's nomadic and it's so elemental. And I think that's one thing, the complete opposite of the way we live now in this country. So whenever I get close to something that seems real and natural, it's also very heartwarming, and
Hmm.
you want to go there and be there for a while in your imagination.
Or when you're saying nature, you mean just simple living, like where there isn't.
Simple living with relationships with animals, and um, being a shepherd girl, cooking over a fire, seeing a full sky of stars at night.
Mm.
I think we can't even imagine those contacts anymore in so much of our lives. Uh, gathering your food and from gardens and meadows. And I would have a hard time hunting just because of my passion for animals, but just appreciating all the things that nature gives us and how we're a part of it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
because weren't you went to a university in North Carolina and didn't you get like a religion major too?
Yeah, I did. And in those days, I was very interested in Eastern religions and the philosophy. My favorite course was the philosophy of religion. And I've had a passion for philosophy ever since. I've had a tutor for 20 years who I talk with once a week, and I read a lot of philosophy. And
Oh,
um,
wow.
I got interested in intellectual Catholicism and Thomas Aquinas and Augustine and Dante, and we studied all of those in my with my tutor, and I did, and I just that's my form of relaxation, is taking a book of philosophy with me somewhere and sitting in a cafe and reading it, trying to
Wow.
understand it. And I think that was the direct came out of my study of world religions. And then I did a book on world religions in the 90s for children that really helped me see the commonalities and the differences
Mm.
and the rituals and stories. I said I spent several years working on that book.
Wow. Well, in your journey of philosophy and discovery, I mean, what have you concluded? Because I know philosophy, I mean, that's philosophy. There's so much, right? There's so many questions that don't always have answers. Um,
Well,
but
I
for
sort of
you,
thank
what?
you for asking that. No, I never get asked that, and I've really never formed a quick answer. But it has something. I love Greek philosophy and its merger with Christianity and Judeo-Christian tradition in the West, and how all of that evolved into the rights that we all feel that are part of the founding of this country. and
Hmm.
how it led to reason and rationality and freedom of thought and women's freedom and um, all of that I base on those early times, sort of 2000 years ago when people were trying to kind of reset the world from a more tribal and uh, empire way of being. And it's a beautiful thing to study, whether or not you can reach conclusions. But I'm always in the mode of grabbing a new thought, a new piece of philosophy or poetry from the past that moves me along with joy and a way to look at the world. So,
Yeah.
uh, politics to me seems the least evolved way to look at the world. And I just, to me, it's like the skim on top of the cream. It's like, okay, I get, but I think today people think that's philosophy and that's religion, and that's so little. I think the deeper stuff is underneath that. And I like to try to swim underneath that and not get involved too much in, you know, fighting any sides. But
Yeah.
I'm not, there's a stream of thought that truly is ancient to this present time that is wise. And I think if you can get into that, you just swim with it.
Stream of thought being what stream of
A,
thought?
a way to appreciate the world, appreciate the human in the world, and appreciate a sense of a greater uh, sense of transcendence and also meaning and value. I'm not a
Yeah.
relativist. I feel there, I'm constantly trying to find the Tao, that you would read about in Taoism, as well as the Logos in Christianity and Greek thought.
Yeah.
And, you know, throws me back on people like C.S. Lewis or Tolkien or some of the thinkers who, in our time relatively have written so beautifully on those subjects.
Yeah. So for you, are you still kind of discovering if there is like a God kind of
Well, I
thing?
think I've never in my life since the day I was born thought there wasn't. I
Mm.
always had a sense of some kind of great goodness, that I could turn to in hard times. Like when I was in that hospital in Kathmandu and then trying to get back to the States alone. And when other traumas have happened, I've clung to something that was gave me strength and, just felt a presence. Uh, and I would wish that for everybody,
Yeah.
they in whatever form that it means the most to them. And in my life, it's come in different ways. But I think that the Christian way now, since I wrote that book on the world religions, as I was working on it, I thought this one has more to offer than I ever imagined. And
Hmm.
then I started getting into the old texts and the the writings that go back to the first 10 centuries, um, and also the terrific impact Christianity's had on everything in the West, whether we acknowledge it or know it or not. Our laws, like I said before, our rights, um, our sense of good and bad.
Yeah.
And
That's interesting you say that. It doesn't seem though that a lot of people agree with that. I think most people would think Christianity is very divisive and um non-conforming and non-accepting. Um, I mean, but in your study of that, ha it doesn't seem like that's the case.
yeah, I think one word would prevail is love. And the Christianity releasing love so powerfully into the world for all kinds of people, from the lowest to the highest, to the lepers, to the kings and the queens. It was not tribal. And it spread itself throughout the world in a way of connecting with that which is unlike you and isn't just what you know.
Hmm.
And love being that connection and that the real order of Christianity. And I think if it gets um, mean spirited or exclusive. It's not what was really taught in the beginning. There's an
Mm,
openness and a freedom to your heart, everyone's heart connecting to a loving presence. And that's oversimplified. I went through a phase and wrote a book about it called Standing in the Light of Quakerism in the
mm,
90s. And uh, there's so much beauty in Quakerism because it's so geared toward the inner light and
yeah.
knowing and reaching for that in quietness and solitude. And um, writing that book was really persuasive for me for quite a few years. I went to Quaker meetings, and then I got more interested in Catholicism because of the historical uh, weight of that amazing history.
Yeah.
But I still find all religions fascinating, Taoism and Buddhism and Hinduism. I try to keep myself educated on those fronts too, because it's so rich and the mythologies of all the faiths are so amazing.
And did you get an interest from it because of the travel, or did you really want to like find something through the
I think I
search?
really wanted to find something. I
Yeah.
think I always did when I was, even as a kid. Uh, I was, I remember riding my bike when I was 10 years old and stopping it at this tiny little country church and sneaking inside and lighting a candle and saying prayers and leaving. And it was just instinctive, something that I could turn to and and uh, and feel joy around. It's really, there are no words for it, but I think
Mm,
there are ultimately no words for faith. It's they sometimes say you have to have faith. You have to believe in order to have faith. Like you have to throw yourself in, and then you'll get some understanding that doesn't have words. We live in words all the time where we're chopping things up and dividing thoughts and pitting them against each other. We're very left brain people who overuse the left brain to categorize and you know um, stigmatize and make everything very uniform. Whereas the right brain used to be much more in charge before the Enlightenment, where it could actually use the left brain, but the right brain was open to great fields of thought,
mm,
imagination, spirits, whatever you want to call it. But we've clamped down on all of that in the last 300 years and industrialized and now made technology our left brain, empire. So it's all involved in everything that we're talking about in our lives every day. Philosophy is, but we just don't give it that kind of attention.
mm. So interesting. I think you're one of the few people I've met who's actually made a life work of studying philosophy and different religions. It's just so interesting.
Well, it could be anyone's hobby. I've never, except for writing. I did a book on the life of Christ and masterpieces of art, and a book of the Random House Bible stories. So I had some good projects that tapped into that interest. But basically, it's a hobby. It's what I do in my spare time. My husband plays guitar and I read philosophy, and those are our free afternoons.
Well, you're seeking, you're exploring, you want to know truth. I think that's really admirable.
Well,
Um,
I'm 75 years old, and the only thing that upsets me about death is I won't figure much out, even if I live to be 100. You, I just want forever to be doing what I'm doing. And I don't mean writing Magic Treehouse. I've been studying philosophy, learning, learning. Hmm.
well, Mary, I've got to say, this has been such a wonderful time talking with you, and you're so sweet and um open, and I mean, there's just a part of me wishes like you were my grandmother when I was growing up because I would have loved to have your imaginative view on life. I feel like you would be so fun. Um, and
Yeah.
also thanks for writing these books because they really have blessed so many kids.
Well, thank you. And you were a great interviewer. You do this really well because I haven't answered questions like this forever. So thank you. I
Oh, you're
enjoyed it.
so welcome. Thank you. Well, I hope you have a good day, Mary.
You too, and always.
Bye.
Bye bye.